What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. Today, we're going to talk about 3 running back matchups that I like this week for fantasy football and 3 running backs that I don't like for fantasy football, and I might consider looking at other options in my fantasy football leagues. So without wasting any more time, let's hop right into the 3 guys that I like first. Now, the first player whose matchup I like a lot this week is going to be Isiah Pacheco for the Kansas City Chiefs. And right now, I think Isiah Pacheco is going to be sitting as a low-end running back 1 for me in my rankings. And he gets a matchup this week here against the Los Angeles Chargers. And it does have a favorable game script for Isiah Pacheco. It is slightly going to lean towards the run if it does perform the way that some of these sportsbooks over in Vegas think that it will. And this team is giving up the 10th most points to the running back position at 21.1 points per game, that being the Los Angeles Chargers, of course. And Pacheco, he has been a top 15 player in fantasy football at the position for 4 straight weeks now. He's averaging about 20 opportunities per game, which is more than Bijan Robinson, surprisingly enough. And he's been a featured part of this offense over the last month or so, just like I said. And he's a top 10 player at the position for me this week in this matchup against the Chargers. So when we look at his projections over on Underdog Fantasy, they do have him projected at 82.5 total yards, and I like the higher on his rushing attempts projection, which is sat at 14.5 attempts, because he has gone over that in each of his last 4 games. Now, the second player whose matchup I like a lot is going to be Aaron Jones, and he gets to play against the Denver Broncos. And I have Aaron Jones as a low-end running back 1 as well in his matchup this week. And like I said, this game is against the Denver Broncos. It's projected to be a neutral and competitive game script, but Denver is currently the easiest matchup for fantasy football running backs so far this year. They're giving up about 35.9 points per game. When you look at what Aaron Jones has done this year, it's really just been a tough go for Aaron Jones. He's had this hamstring injury that he's battled all year long, but it seems like he's back. He's ready to go. It seemed like he could have possibly went last week, but they were being overly cautious with Aaron Jones. And like I said, the Broncos are one of the easiest matchups for running backs so far this year. They're giving up about 172 yards per game to the running back position. So for me, Aaron Jones is going to be a top 12 player at the position this week. And when we look at his projections over on Underdog Fantasy, they do currently have him projected at 75.5 total yards, but I do like the higher on his rushing yard projection, which is sitting at 50.5 yards right now. Now, the third player who I like in his matchup this week is going to be James Cook, and he gets to play against the New England Patriots here on the road. And I currently have James Cook as a high-end running back 2 in my fantasy football rankings so far this week. And like I said, this matchup against the New England Patriots, it is projected to be a very lopsided affair. It has the largest spread of the week, and this is going to favor Buffalo leaning on their run game as they get into the second half of this matchup here. And while the Damian Harris injury that happened last week doesn't necessarily mean that we will see a larger workload for James Cook, the likeliest scenario is probably that we will see more Latavius Murray in this matchup, but that doesn't mean that the Buffalo Bills are not going to expect a little bit more out of James Cook here in this matchup, especially in the run game. And I like Cook as an upside play in this matchup with some decent touchdown potential in a game where we do likely see 1 or 2 rushing touchdowns out of Buffalo in this matchup. And I think James Cook is going to be a top 15 play at the running back position this week. And when we look at his projections over on Underdog Fantasy, they do have him projected at 52.5 rushing yards and 71.5 total yards this week. And I like both of these projections, but I would be taking the higher on the 71.5 total yards. But now that we've talked about 3 guys who I like, let's talk about 3 guys that I don't really like for fantasy football this week. And we're going to start with the Minnesota Vikings running back Alexander Mattison, and he gets to play against the San Francisco 49ers. And Mattison is currently sitting as a low-end running back 2 in my rankings so far this week. This week, the matchup against the San Francisco 49ers projects to be a game that slightly favors Minnesota leaning on the pass and against a team that is a top 10 defense against the running back position. Now, when Mattison has had similar game scripts and matchups this season, specifically against Philadelphia and Kansas City, he did fail to ever rush for more than 30 yards or gain 50 total yards in those matchups. And I think this week's matchup against the San Francisco 49ers is tough enough and similar enough to those 2 matchups that I just stated that I currently have Mattison outside of my top 20 running backs on the week. And when we look at his projection over on Underdog Fantasy, they currently have him projected 45.5 rushing yards and 68.5 total yards. And I do like the lower on both of these numbers, but I specifically will be targeting that lower on the 68.5 total yards. Now, the second player that I'm going to be avoiding in my lineups this week is going to be Zack Moss for the Indianapolis Colts. And I currently have him as a low-end running back 2, maybe even a flex option for you this week. And he gets the matchup against the Cleveland Browns, and it projects to be a very low-scoring affair. This is a defense that has been historically good, and they are top 5 against opposing running backs backs so far for fantasy football this year, and Moss has been great as a fill-in for Jonathan Taylor so far this year. But last week, it does look like we did get pushed to a 50-50 split between him and Taylor, and I do expect Taylor to take on an even larger workload this week. And there's a chance that Moss can have some value here through the air, but really, if we're looking at a 50-50 split like I project or worse, then I do think that this defense is good enough that they likely will have minimal value without a touchdown going their way. And I currently have Moss outside of my top 20 running backs on the week, and if you look at his projections over on Underdog Fantasy, they currently have him projected at 35.5 rushing yards. And even though this number does seem very low, I still like the lower on the projection, because last week Moss ran 7 times for 21 yards against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, the third and final player that I'm going to be avoiding in my lineups this week is going to be Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he gets to play against the Los Angeles Rams in this one. And I think Najee Harris is really just a flex at this point in fantasy football leagues. The Rams do project to have a competitive game with the Steelers in this one. It's a neutral game script against a defense that we know is top 7 against opposing running backs so far this year, giving up only 14 points per game to the position. And a crazy stat that I didn't know before this week, but Najee has finished behind Jaylen Warren in fantasy points every single week so far this year, and it's simply just looking like he's being outproduced by Jaylen Warren. Now, you hope that maybe Najee Harris has figured this out coming out of the bye week here, and with Deontay Johnson back in the lineup, that this offense starts to look a little bit better, open some things up for Najee Harris. But until I see Najee put this on tape, he will remain outside of my top 24 running backs for this week. And even if we wanted to go look at Underdog for some projections for Najee Harris, there are currently no projections for him over on Underdog Fantasy, so we can't reference those either. Now, for those of you following along at home, if you want to play over on Underdog Fantasy, sign up using code League FFB when you sign up to get a 100% deposit match up to $100, and you can play these pick'em lines with us. If you've been following the picks that we like for the running back so far this week, we're taking the higher on the 14.5 rushing attempts for Isiah Pacheco, the higher on the 50.5 rushing yards for Aaron Jones, the higher on 71.5 rushing and receiving yards for James Cook, and then we will take the lower on the 68.5 rushing and receiving yards for Alexander Mattison, and the lower on the 35.5 rushing yards for Zack Moss. 5 out of 5 correct on those ones will get you 20 times your entry. So if you played a mere $10, you could have a $200 profit if we go 5 for 5 on these picks this week. And we've done it in the past, so maybe we'll do it again for you guys this week. But like I said, that's all I have for you guys today. So if you did enjoy the video, go ahead and hit that like button. It is the best free way to show our channel some support. If you want to see more videos like this each and every day, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to talk fantasy football, get some help with your fantasy football waivers, trade questions, start sit questions, or just talk NFL with me, go ahead and join my free Discord. With all of that being said, I will see you guys on our next video, but until then, peace out.